Every city has its secrets, but Paris has legends. And among all its tales of love, revolution, and art, there's one story that seems almost too extraordinary to be true. A story about a man who did the impossible. He sold this. The Eiffel Tower, not once, but twice. When Victor Lustig was born in 1890, no one could have guessed he would become history's boldest trickster. He came from nowhere special, just a small town in what's now the Czech Republic. We know almost nothing about his childhood, which is fitting for a man who spent his life becoming different people whenever it suited him. Victor had an amazing talent. He could make anyone believe anything. While kings and countries fought for power, Victor was learning how to talk his way into wealth. He didn't need armies or royal blood, just charm, quick thinking, and the nerve to attempt what no one else would dare. His greatest trick. He sold the Eiffel Tower when it wasn't even for sale. And then, incredibly, he sold it again. What we do know is that Lustig possessed a remarkable intelligence and linguistic aptitude. By his early 20s, he had mastered 5 languages: Czech, German, English, French, and Italian, speaking each with such convincing fluency that native speakers rarely detected an accent. This gift would become the foundation of his criminal career, allowing him to move seamlessly between countries and cultures, adopting and shedding nationalities as circumstances required. Lustig's education extended far beyond languages. He developed an encyclopedic knowledge of human psychology, not from textbooks, but from careful observation. He studied how wealth signaled itself through subtle details of dress and behavior. He noted how people's desires and insecurities manifested in unconscious gestures. Most importantly, he learned how the powerful combination of greed and vanity could override even the most rational person's judgment. By his mid-20s, Lustig had rejected conventional career paths. Europe was experiencing the tail end of its Belle Époque, an era of peace, artistic flourishing, and technological revolution that created unprecedented wealth. For a young man with Lustig's gifts, this environment offered fertile ground for exploitation. Lustig's first hunting grounds were the luxury ocean liners crossing between Europe and America. These floating palaces were microcosms of high society, filled with wealthy travelers displaying their fortunes through jewelry, fashion, and liberal spending. Many were industrialists and financiers who had built their wealth through speculation and investment and were constantly looking for new opportunities to multiply their riches. On these ships, isolated from the outside world for days at a time, Lustig perfected his craft. He studied passengers carefully, identifying those with both means and vulnerability. He practiced creating and maintaining personas: the exiled aristocrat, the innovative inventor, the well-connected businessman calibrating each role to appeal to specific targets. During these early years, Lustig developed what he would later call his 10 Commandments, principles that guided his criminal career. 1. Be a patient listener. Don't talk fast. That gets a con man his coups. 2. Never appear bored. A con artist should show interest in all subjects. 3. Wait for the other person to reveal political opinions, then agree. 4. Let the other person reveal religious views, then have the same ones. 5. Hint at sex talk, but let the mark lead the way, then be eager to follow. 6. Never discuss illness, unless some special concern is shown. 7. Never pry into a person's personal circumstances. They'll tell you eventually. 8. Never boast. Just let your importance be quietly obvious. 9. Never be untidy. 10. Never get drunk. These weren't just abstract principles, they were practical rules that protected Lustig from exposure. By letting others reveal themselves first, he minimized the risk of contradicting his fabricated persona. By maintaining impeccable appearance, he created an immediate impression of credibility. By staying sober while his marks indulged, he maintained a critical advantage. It was on these transatlantic crossings that Lustig first deployed what would become one of his signature schemes, the money printing box. This ingenious device purportedly used chemical processes to duplicate banknotes. Lustig would demonstrate the machine by inserting a legitimate $100 bill, applying various chemicals, and after a waiting period of 6 hours, extracting 2 seemingly identical $100 bills from the device. What the buyer didn't know was that Lustig had simply hidden 2 genuine bills in a secret compartment. By the time the mark realized the machine produced nothing but blank paper, Lustig had vanished with a substantial purchase price typically between $10,000 and $30,000, equivalent to hundreds of thousands in today's currency. The con exploited a fundamental truth of human nature. People are more willing to engage in questionable activities when they believe they're victimizing a system rather than an individual. The marks knew that counterfeiting was illegal, but their greed overwhelmed their moral qualms. This complicity ensured they were unlikely to report being swindled, as doing so would reveal their own criminal intent. The First World War transformed Europe, leaving once great nations economically devastated and politically unstable. For most, this era of uncertainty and hardship represented tragedy. For Lustig, it was opportunity. France had suffered particularly severe losses. Nearly 1.4 million French soldiers had died, and much of the country's northeastern industrial heartland lay in ruins. The government struggled to finance reconstruction while simultaneously paying war debts. Paris in 1925 still retained its beauty, but maintenance of public monuments and infrastructure had become increasingly difficult to fund. Even the iconic Eiffel Tower, originally built as a temporary structure for the 1889 World's Fair, showed signs of neglect. One morning, while enjoying his coffee and reading Le Matin, Lustig came across an article discussing the deteriorating condition of the Eiffel Tower and the costly maintenance it required. A seed of an idea took root in his mind, perhaps his most audacious scheme yet. Lustig began by researching every aspect of the tower: its construction, maintenance requirements, the government agencies responsible for its upkeep, and the bureaucratic procedures that would be involved in any major decisions about its future. Within days, he had established a new identity as Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs, a convincing but deliberately vague title. He hired a forger to create authentic-looking credentials and had official stationery printed with government letterheads. Lustig then sent formal letters to 5 of Paris's top scrap metal dealers. The letters were masterpieces of bureaucratic communication, important sounding but deliberately obscure, hinting at a significant opportunity without revealing details. Each recipient was invited to a confidential meeting at the prestigious Hôtel de Crillon to discuss a matter of national importance. When the dealers arrived, Lustig delivered a performance that demonstrated his psychological genius. Speaking with the precise, slightly bored tone of a career bureaucrat, he explained that the government had made a difficult decision. The Eiffel Tower would need to be dismantled. Lustig continued, explaining that the dismantling needed to be handled with extreme discretion due to the likely public outcry. The government wished to avoid a public tender process that would attract media attention. The next day, Lustig arranged for government transportation to take the dealers to inspect the tower. Throughout the tour, he pointed out signs of rust and disrepair. Some genuine, others exaggerated or entirely fabricated. He answered technical questions with surprising expertise, having thoroughly researched metallurgy and engineering principles. As they toured, Lustig carefully observed each dealer, noting their levels of enthusiasm, skepticism, and most importantly, the extent to which vanity might override their business judgment. He was looking for a specific type of mark, someone successful enough to afford the scheme, but insecure enough to be susceptible to flattery. He found his ideal candidate in André Poisson, a dealer who was relatively new to the industry and eager to establish himself among Paris's business elite. Lustig arranged a private meeting with Poisson the following day. During this meeting, Poisson expressed concerns about the unusual nature of the deal. Sensing his mark's hesitation, Lustig executed the masterstroke of his con, a false confession that transformed skepticism into belief. With an air of resigned confidentiality, Lustig admitted that his position wasn't as lucrative as it appeared. He implied that his involvement in selecting the contractor for the Eiffel Tower project was motivated by the need to supplement his government salary. Far from deterring Poisson, this implied request for a bribe actually convinced him of the deal's legitimacy. Corruption among officials was something he understood. It transformed an unbelievable scenario into a familiar business transaction. Lustig's seemingly vulnerable confession created an immediate sense of insider complicity between them. The next day, Poisson paid approximately 250,000 francs, equivalent to roughly $1 million today, to become the exclusive contractor for dismantling the Eiffel Tower. Lustig provided impressively official-looking contracts complete with government seals and signatures. With the payment secured, Lustig immediately fled to Austria. For the next week, he anxiously scanned French newspapers, expecting headlines announcing the scandalous attempt to sell the nation's most recognizable landmark. But the headlines never came. Poisson, too embarrassed to admit he had been duped and likely concerned about revealing his willingness to pay a bribe, never reported the scam to authorities. Most con artists would have considered the Eiffel Tower scheme the crowning achievement of their career, a story to privately relish while remaining far from the scene of the crime. But Victor Lustig wasn't most con artists. A month later, having confirmed that his scheme remained unreported, Lustig returned to Paris. With breathtaking audacity, he repeated the entire con with a different group of scrap metal dealers. The second time, however, his selected mark was more diligent. Before finalizing the transaction, the dealer made inquiries with government officials and discovered the fraud. Lustig was forced to flee empty-handed. This willingness to return to the scene of such a high-profile con reveals something essential about Lustig's character. For him, the artistry of deception was as rewarding as financial gain. He was addicted not just to money, but to the thrill of the performance, to the rush of seeing reality bend to his will. Following his European successes, Lustig eventually made his way to America during the height of Prohibition. The United States offered new opportunities and challenges. While Lustig didn't speak English with the same native fluency as his European languages, America's melting pot nature meant that foreign accents often enhanced rather than diminished one's social credibility. In Chicago, Lustig's reputation as a skilled confidence man brought him into contact with the city's criminal elite. While the Eiffel Tower con remains Lustig's most famous scheme, his most lucrative criminal enterprise was his counterfeiting operation with master engraver William Watts. In 1930, Lustig persuaded Watts, a legitimate engraver struggling during the Depression, to create plates for printing $100 bills. The results were extraordinary, some of the most convincing counterfeits the U.S. Treasury had ever encountered. For months, Lustig distributed these bills across multiple states, amassing substantial wealth. His method was characteristically cautious. Rather than flooding the market with fake bills, he circulated them slowly through a network of associates, minimizing the chance of detection. But even the most careful criminals make mistakes. Lustig's downfall came not from the counterfeiting itself, but from the complicated romantic life that success enabled. Lustig maintained relationships with multiple women, including a mistress named Billie Mae. When she discovered Lustig was seeing another woman, her jealousy motivated her to contact federal authorities and reveal his counterfeiting operation. In 1935, Lustig was arrested and charged with counterfeiting. Even in custody, his remarkable abilities didn't desert him. While awaiting trial at the Federal House of Detention in New York, he fashioned a rope from bed sheets and escaped by climbing out of a window, despite being 12 stories above the ground. His freedom was short-lived. Federal agents recaptured him in Pittsburgh just 27 days later. This time, there would be no escape. Lustig was sentenced to 20 years in Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, America's most secure prison, located on an island in San Francisco Bay. Life in Alcatraz was brutal, particularly for someone accustomed to luxury. Lustig's health deteriorated under the harsh conditions, and he contracted pneumonia. On March 11, 1947, Victor Lustig died in the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri, where he had been transferred as his condition worsened. He was 57 years old. His death certificate listed his occupation as apprentice salesman, perhaps the greatest understatement in a life defined by extraordinary deception. The Eiffel Tower stands today as France's most recognizable landmark, visited by millions annually. Few of those visitors know that this immovable monument, a symbol of French engineering and cultural identity, was once sold by a smooth-talking Czech, with nothing but forged credentials and unshakable confidence. When Lustig was arrested in 1935, authorities found in his pocket a worn piece of paper containing his 10 commandments for con artists. The last of these commandments reads, "Be a good listener. It is as important to please others as to impress them." Perhaps there lies the true genius of Victor Lustig, not just in what he said to his victims, but in what he heard from them. Their hopes, their greed, their vanities. He didn't just sell the Eiffel Tower. He sold people a version of themselves they wanted to believe in. In a world where technology has transformed almost everything, that fundamental vulnerability remains unchanged. The tools of deception evolve, but the human weaknesses they exploit endure, a lasting legacy of the man who sold the Eiffel Tower twice.